What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York. We are back at the St. Vitus basement, and we are here with Leo and Shaun of Street Sects. Thank you guys so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. You released these Gentrification series singles. What I was curious is, for a listener to fully comprehend like the whole concept and the whole sound of the Gentrification series, is it better if they start off with like part one and then listen to these records chronologically, or can they just approach it from any angle?
I think you can approach it from any angle. I mean, it's a serialized album in that it's 5 separate installments to one album, but it's not chronological. Each installment is kind of its own thing.
And the making of each one was kind of like its own approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's a unified theme, but there's a micro-fiction piece in each thing, and it's all its own little segment of the larger theme, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Is this at all any way connected to your last full-length album, The Kicking Mule, or do you think that this is kind of like its own sort of standout in the Street Sects catalog?
It's definitely its own thing, because we started it. The Gentrification series was the first thing we ever did.
Oh, really?
Parts 1 and 2 were the very first 2 singles we ever did, and we put those on hold to work with the Flenser for End Position, and we just never managed to get back to them until this year.
Okay. So when you went back to them, like, on this year, did you, like, change anything, or is, like, what we're hearing, like, almost like the first initial take of it?
No, it changed a bit in the musical direction, because those were the first things we created, Gentrification 1 and 2. Then we made In Position, Rat Jacket, I started making demos for Gentrification 3, 4, 5, but then we were making the Kicking Mule, and I learned things along the way and couldn't help but include that when we returned. But we did look back on those two and try to make it unified, like a unified, cohesive sound.
Interesting. What I find unique, though, is that your music is very experimental. I see elements of, like, hardcore, some industrial, I feel like your music really kind of, like, is a jack of all trades in a way. So I'd imagine with the making of everything you've done, it has to be easy to sort of try new things, right?
It's desired to try new things. I think for some bands, when they land on a sound or, dare I say, genre bands, they end up sort of dialing it in, especially if, they get good feedback. Someone tells them it's good. We from the start wanted to try new things. That's how we arrived at the sound we did. We tried a few other things, scratched it, and then just kept revising until we got to this sort of sample-based, cut-up sound. And then over time, say like the Rat Jacket release and definitely the Kicking Mule brought in guitar. I was a guitarist for a long time. We just removed it intentionally with the first few releases because I wanted to write electronic and we wanted to see where we could go with that. But more and more we're bringing in real instrumentation and trying out other kinds of keyboards and various software. Yeah. And I don't think anything is off limits. We'll try anything, any style of music if we're into it at the moment, if we're feeling that. Yeah.
Is there ever a time where, like, a lyrical concept or sort of like a theme could help determine the outcome of the music itself? Or like, maybe like just a concept is totally secondary?
You mean like the concept of the lyrical concept overall, or the themes?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah. I mean the theme of the record will often kind of guide what the lyrics are going to be. So, it's not always like for instance, the Kicking Mule is not like a concept album. It's these little vignettes that are all kind of fall under this kind of film noir kind of honesty and kind of crime kind of thing. But then End Position is, I guess, more what you would call a concept album. Mm-hmm. The Gentrification stuff kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah.
But Shaun never writes music to the themes or the lyrics. It's the other way around.
Okay. So it's not like you think of like a concept beforehand and that determines like the music, or
it kind of happens all at the same time. Like we'll start working on something, and and whenever Shaun is in the earliest stages, like End Position, when he was still writing the earliest demos, I already had the title, I already had the song titles, and some of the themes that I was going to be writing about. So it's kind of like a back and forth, but it's never like I give him a set of lyrics and he writes music to it. It doesn't
Right.
work that way.
okay. Is there ever a time, or like, can the music be open to interpretation, or do you try to maybe engage the listener into what the music can be about?
Open to interpretation as I'm writing it?
Yeah, or like when somebody's listening to it, is the music open to interpretation?
just the finished product
Yeah.
itself. I would say that our music, I hope, has that going for it, in the sense that it has, especially in position, has so many layered sounds that with each listen, something new arises. And that's the hope for that. Not just dialed in, very clear melodies, very clear instrumentation. It's got a lot of layered stuff that at first listen may not exactly fit together.
When it comes to getting inspired to write, does inspiration to write an album sometimes come out of nowhere, or do you kind of have to put yourself in a certain element in order to get into like the songwriting mode?
I find that there are those moments, but I can't wait for them. So I do try to write every day. I pick times that I know work. I try to remove things that might hinder that, certain obligations of the day or people you gotta talk with or engage with. But sometimes, something will come over really strongly, and you'll have to follow it if you can. You've got the luxury. Some people, they have to work, they have to do what they must do, but if it comes on strongly, that is your best shot. I mean, they call it creative flow or whatever it is, a certain type of energy, but it should definitely be used because it's motivating, and you'll discover things while in that mode.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I was really curious about is, this was my first time ever seeing you guys live tonight, and may I just say, phenomenal performance. It was like, and with your use of lights and fog and all that stuff, I couldn't see like 2 feet in front of me in the venue. You had to see people like waving the bartender down like with lights or something to get their attention. But when it comes to playing your material live, is there a different energy in your live setting as opposed to when you're like in the studio or in songwriting mode? Or is there maybe like a similar sort of method behind the madness, so to speak?
I mean, it's definitely two different things altogether. I mean, when we're writing records or songs, it's really meticulous, and it's very slow and meticulous, and it takes a long time. So, I mean, when I'm trying to do a vocal take, I'm going to try to capture that energy and the performance of the vocal take. But aside from that, I mean, when we're building a live set, we're trying to create something that's going to engage the audience on a high energy level, and that's really what's most important. Whereas on a record, you may take, stylistic or emotional detours that at least we wouldn't necessarily want to include on a live set, because I feel like people have short attention spans, and we try to engage on that level.
Yeah. Well, I feel like your music really does capture a moment that, like, when you're listening to an album, and I obviously don't know how many times when you're making a song, like how many takes you do of it, but I feel like your music does capture a moment. And I feel like on the album and a live presence, while they're both equally fulfilling, I feel like at the same time you can't recapture like a moment from when you wrote the song and when you're executing it live. I think it's two separate entities. I could be wrong, but
You're not wrong.
well, one thing that I find unique is I just started asking artists this question: is music in a way like a way of expressing your personal selves, or is music kind of like a way of escaping who you are?
For me, it's definitely expressing who I am. In lyrical content and things like that. I mean, I would say the live performance is more of an escape for me, because that's the high. That's like, if you make it through like, grandma's green bean casserole, that you don't want to eat, the live show is the, chocolate fudge sundae you get at the end. It's the reward for doing the work and putting your heart and your soul as best you could down on a document that is the song.
You officially win the award for the best analogy I've ever gotten in an interview. Like, for real. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is, I want you both to answer this, because this is always the hardest question for every artist to answer. How do you know when a song is done? You first.
It's never done. It's never done.
I hear that all the time.
It's done when I take it away from him and send it to Seth, our engineer.
Yeah. I've quibbled over things, and I'm always pretty hard on myself after the fact. And it's too late when it's on record. Especially this kind of music, because you can revise and revise and revise. You're not in a room with session musicians. Granted, maybe jazz, you could hash it out forever, but a lot of people don't. They come up with their parts, They may change it a little bit, but it's going to be the main thing, and it stays that way. You do your take, and mostly it stays the same. But with electronic music, and especially if you're creating it in software, you can go and go and go and change everything over and again, cut up samples endlessly. And our music, you can always drop things out. You can always change things just slightly and bring out an intensity, whether it's going to be in the drums, the bass, drop in another sound. I mean, it can really go that way. And I sometimes go back after a pause because you're in the moment creating something, and I'm trying to work with the sounds, but then later I go back and I think I should have shaped some of those sounds differently. The collage pieces that end up in our music, you know, sampled guitar, voices, or just things that are found sounds with microphones and so on.
How do you know when a song's done?
For my part of it, I mean, you know, lyric writing for me can be like pulling teeth. It can be very difficult, and because to me lyrics are very important. So if I'm going to write something and I think it's not good enough, I'm going to redo it and work on it again and again. And so for me, it's done when it ticks all the boxes that I need. It has to sound the way I want it to sound. The words have to fit the shape of the phrasing and the vowels that I wanted when I sing along to it, because I sing along nonsense for months before I actually write the words. And so it's got to sound the way I want it to sound, and then it has to have words that I think are well written, and most importantly that are honest and express what I'm trying to express from the emotional viewpoint of the music, you know?
Yeah, and nothing could be more heartbreaking than having like the best lyrics ever and then just seeing how they go like one or two syllables over like the actual arrangements. That's got to be the worst.
Yeah.
So before we go, I want to thank you guys so much for your time today. Is there just anything else with Street Sects you would like to promote in terms of tours or new music? This will be uploaded later tonight, so if it hasn't been announced, don't say it.
No, we're finishing out the rest of this tour with Elizabeth Colorwheel from now up until the 20th of this month, which ends in Austin, and then I believe January 3rd? 10th? January 10th, we head to the West Coast with Portrayal of Guilt. And yeah, that's it for now.
Oh, Portrayal of Guilt is awesome.
It's going to be. They're from Austin as well, and it's going to be fantastic.
Yep. And I would imagine I'll probably see you guys at NAMM afterwards, right?
Okay, yeah.
But thank you guys so much for your time.